My name is Quinn Harwood. I'm 67 years old, a retired school secretary, and a grandmother to a little girl who sees far more than most grown men ever will. For decades, I was the quiet one in the family, the note-taker, the calendar keeper, the one who remembered birthdays, packed the lunches, stayed up folding costumes for school plays. When my husband Jack died, I folded that grief into the laundry and kept going. I didn't ask for thanks, but I also didn't expect the moment my silence would be weaponized against me. It happened at Christmas. My son, Thomas, had invited 50 guests to the grand living room of his modern home. Wine glasses glittering, fire crackling, children in red and green pajamas curling up beside expensive furniture. Everything looked perfect, even if the air was too tight to breathe. And then, in front of all of them, my only child turned to me and screamed, "Stop standing there like some relic. This isn't about you. You're lucky to even be invited." I froze, not because it hurt, though it did, but because the room stayed silent. No one flinched. No one reached for my hand. I think someone sipped their drink. But then, from the far end of the table, my 9-year-old granddaughter stood up. Hazel. She held the tablet I'd given her last year, now covered in glitter stickers and fingerprints, but still functional. Calmly, she walked between the wine glasses and adults with frozen faces, stood next to me, and raised the screen. Her voice was clear and quiet. "Grandpa's watching," she said, from the cloud and the court. And just like that, my son, the man who once held my hand crossing the street, fell silent. I suppose if you're still watching this, you're wondering what came before that moment, or what came after. It's not a story told in shouts, but in glances, in papers left unsigned, in the spaces people try to erase you from. I invite you to stay, listen closely, and if it reminds you of someone you know, or perhaps yourself, know that you're not alone. Now let me take you back, just 1 week before Christmas. It began with an envelope. Not a phone call, not a visit, an envelope. Thick paper, printed return address, no handwriting, no warmth. The invitation read, Christmas Eve gathering, formal attire, arrival by 5:30 p.m. sharp, family introductions and legacy acknowledgments at 6. Legacy acknowledgments? I had to read that part twice. I set the invitation down on the counter beside my tea and turned toward the window. My apartment was quiet except for the radiator ticking. Snow hadn't come yet, but the sky threatened it. A gray sheet pulled low over Salem, Oregon. Later that evening, a letter arrived inside Hazel's drawing. She'd tucked it beneath a folded page of stick figures and stars. I almost missed it. Grandpa says, protect yourself. That's all it said. No signature, just Hazel's careful block letters and a tiny hand-drawn cloud at the bottom. I stared at the note longer than I care to admit. Jack used to leave me messages like that, cryptic one-liners meant to make me pause, think, recalculate. He never trusted surface-level smiles, especially from people who benefited too much from being seen as kind. I hadn't heard Hazel mention Jack in months, and yet here she was, quoting him as though he had whispered it into her ear from wherever he was now. I kept the letter, slipped it inside my planner, behind the contact for my doctor and the electric bill. Something about it made me stand straighter. Thomas hadn't called in weeks. His emails were clipped. Please confirm attendance. Attached are the dietary preferences of guests. No plus ones. I wasn't a plus one. I was his mother. That Friday, I pulled out the green velvet dress I used to wear to Jack's office parties. The sleeves were tighter now, and the zipper had aged like I had. Slightly slower, a little more stubborn, but it still held. I looked in the mirror and whispered, "You were there when it mattered." Then I wrote Hazel a letter of my own. Nothing dramatic, just a list of 10 things her grandfather loved. The sound of snow crunching under boots, jazz records, especially Coltrane. The way she once drew a dragon with glasses and named it after him. Black coffee at 5 a.m., the swing on our back porch. Quiet people who held strong opinions. Her mother's laugh before the house got too quiet, fixing things that no one knew were broken. Teaching her father to play piano. The way she always told the truth, even when it made people uncomfortable. I folded the list and slipped it in the same envelope she had used. I didn't write a return message. She didn't need one. Hazel had already shown me she knew where to look for answers. The day of the party, I arrived on time. Not early, not late. I wore the green dress, a brooch Jack had given me in 1989, and a pair of black gloves with the fingertips worn soft. Ellie greeted me at the door. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You look lovely," she said, voice too quick. "We're seating you by the window. That way Hazel can find you easily." I nodded, stepped inside, and watched a stranger take my coat. From the corner, Hazel peeked around the banister and gave me the smallest wave. She wore navy blue, not red like the others. Her hair was pulled back with a silver clip. She looked like Jack. Dinner passed in small talk and undercurrents. I didn't speak unless spoken to. I noticed the chair I used to sit in during family dinners was now occupied by a man from Thomas's firm. My new seat creaked, and then came the toast. Thomas raised his glass, smiled for the crowd, and thanked everyone for coming. Then he turned to me. "Some people don't know when it's time to step aside," he said, "but we thank them for making space, even if they don't realize that's all they're good for now." No one said a word, not even Ellie. And then Hazel stood, tablet in hand. She walked to the center of the room, turned to face her father, and said, "Grandpa's watching," from the cloud and the court. The morning after I received the invitation, I stood at my kitchen sink, holding it under the dim light. Thick paper, elegant font, no warmth. I set it down next to my teacup as though it might sting if I held it longer. I'd attended many Christmases before, some quiet, some bustling, some full of Jack's laughter echoing from the basement while he set up model trains for the children. Some tense, especially near the end when Thomas was already pulling away. But this one felt different, even on paper. Family introductions and legacy acknowledgments. What did that even mean? I looked over at the calendar. December 17th, a week before Christmas Eve. Not much time to pretend like everything was fine. Outside, a soft drizzle painted the windows in streaks. Salem always felt like it was in between seasons. Never quite winter, never quite spring, just waiting. I sat down and unfolded Hazel's drawing again, the one she'd mailed in her usual handmade envelope, filled with tiny folded notes and stray glitter. There, tucked beneath a cartoon of me holding a giant mug of cocoa, was that one small sentence, written in pencil. "Grandpa says protect yourself." I held the paper to my chest and shut my eyes. Hazel had only been 5 when Jack passed, but she remembered. She'd clung to his flannel shirts, crawled into my lap, and asked if clouds ever felt heavy from holding people like him. Jack had a way of knowing things before they happened. He never trusted surface niceties, and he certainly never trusted Thomas's ambition when it became sharper than curiosity. That phrase, protect yourself, was something Jack used to say whenever someone underestimated me. He said it the day I got passed over for a promotion because I didn't look like leadership. He said it when Thomas first raised his voice at dinner, after law school changed his tone, but not his posture. I'd laugh it off, but Jack never did. I slipped the drawing back into my planner. That afternoon, I took a walk to the corner bakery. I needed the cold air, the clatter of other people's normal lives. While waiting for my coffee, I ran into Doris Carlton, my friend of nearly 30 years. She used to notarize every school document I filed. Now she walked slower, her cane tapping softly against the linoleum. "You look pale," she said. "Christmas nerves?" I smiled. "Something like that." She sipped her tea and studied me over the rim of her cup. "Let me guess. Formal invitation, no phone call, no warmth?" I blinked. "How did you—" "Because we're all disposable once we've served our purpose," she said, tapping her cane twice on the floor. Some people believe legacy is theirs to shape, erase, and reframe. But truth doesn't expire just because it becomes inconvenient. I nodded, slowly. Doris always had a way of making truth sound like poetry. We walked home together. I didn't tell her much, but she didn't need details. She told me to come by the next day. "Bring any paperwork you've been ignoring," she added with a wink. The next morning, Hazel called from Ellie's phone. Her voice was soft. "Grandma, I can't talk long. Daddy checks Mom's call logs now." I froze. "I sent you the note. Did you read it?" "I did." "Good, just remember what he doesn't say is louder than what he does." I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm working on something. I can't say what yet, but I need you to just not trust the smiles, not even the Christmas ones. Hazel, I love you. Gotta go." The line clicked. I sat in the quiet, her words echoing like wind through a crack in the door. That evening, I dug into the file drawer Jack used to keep locked. Most of it I'd already sorted: tax returns, bank statements, letters from his army days. But beneath the folders was an envelope I didn't remember. It was addressed to me. No postage, no seal. Inside, a photo of Jack and Thomas on our front porch, Jack's hand resting on his son's shoulder. On the back, Jack had written, "Don't let the photo fool you. This boy is good, but someone's going to convince him that power looks better than kindness. Protect him, even if it's from himself." I sat back, breath caught somewhere between past and present. The next day, I visited Doris. I handed her the envelope and told her about the invitation, Hazel's message, and my growing suspicion that Thomas's plans went beyond a simple holiday dinner. She read the note silently, then, without a word, opened her old briefcase and pulled out a sealed manila folder. "I was going to give this to Hazel when she turned 18, but if you ask me, it's time she had someone protecting her too." I stared at the folder. On the front was Jack's signature and a line that read, "Last revision, January 15th, 2016. Jack had passed in March. Doris looked at me. "I notarized it myself. No edits from Thomas. Your husband left a clear map. All we have to do now is follow it." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with the folder on my lap and watched the snow begin to fall. Not much, just the first dusting, but it was enough to make the street outside look softer. I thought of Hazel, probably tucked under too many blankets, her tablet glowing in the dark. I wondered what she was working on. I didn't need to know every detail. I just needed to be ready when she stepped forward. I used to believe there was still a little boy inside Thomas, the one who clung to my arm when the thunder got too loud, who cried when Jack left for long deployments, who sat beside me while I corrected spelling tests, asking how many stars he'd get if he became a teacher too. But lately, I wasn't so sure. The man who stood before me now, in tailored suits and polished shoes, had perfected the art of detachment. He offered smiles with no weight, hugs with one arm, and words so sharp they left invisible cuts. And yet, I held on to that faint hope that maybe, just maybe, underneath it all, the boy was still watching, waiting for the world to feel safe again. A few days after visiting Doris, I was at Thomas's office building to drop off a forgotten ornament Hazel had made. Ellie had texted, asking if I could deliver it before the staff gathering that evening. I hesitated, but Hazel had drawn Jack in the middle of a snow globe, standing between two evergreen trees, her handwriting curled at the bottom, "My Christmas guardian." So I went. The receptionist gave me a stiff smile and offered water. I declined and waited in the lobby, hands resting on the package wrapped in tissue paper. On the wall behind her, a plaque read, "Harwood and Langston LLP, Legacy Through Law." I stared at the word legacy longer than I meant to. I heard him before I saw him. His voice carried through the hallway, clipped and cold. "I don't care if she raised me. She's not entitled to anything. She's a non-performing asset, a complication, one I'm working to resolve. Then silence. A door creaked. Footsteps echoed. He walked into the lobby and stopped short when he saw me. "Mom," he said, blinking. "I didn't know you were—" "I brought Hazel's ornament," I replied, holding it out without emotion. "She said it belonged on the tree." He didn't reach for it right away. He stared at it, and for a brief second I saw the boy again, the boy who used to glue cotton balls onto construction paper snowmen. But then his eyes shifted, calculating. "Thanks," he said, finally taking it. "Ellie will appreciate it." "I imagine Hazel will too." He gave a short laugh that didn't sound like him. "She's too sentimental, like you." "Sentiment isn't a weakness, Thomas." He looked past me, toward the frosted windows. "Depends on what it costs." That night, I pulled out an old VHS tape Jack had converted to DVD before he passed. Hazel helped me find the drive to play it. She sat beside me with a blanket draped over her shoulders, feet tucked under her. On the screen, a grainy image of our living room came to life. Jack sat at the piano, young and proud, coaxing Thomas's tiny hands into chord shapes. "Feel it in your belly, son," Jack said on the video. "Music isn't about the right notes. It's about telling the truth, even if no one claps." Thomas giggled, pressed the wrong key, then tried again. Jack clapped once, loud and proud, and kissed the top of his head. Hazel turned to me. "Did Dad really play?" I nodded. "Every Sunday morning for 2 years. "What happened?" "He got older. Other things became more important." She didn't respond, but her fingers gripped the blanket a little tighter. The next morning, I walked past my old neighborhood. Our house, Jack's house, stood at the end of the cul-de-sac like a photograph half faded. The shutters had been painted over. The swing set we built still leaned to the left, squeaky and forgotten. My breath fogged in the cold, and I realized I hadn't walked this way since the funeral. Thomas had promised me I could stay in the house as long as I wanted. That's what he said when the will was read. "No rush, Mom. We'll sort everything in time." But 6 months later, he suggested it might be healthier for me to live somewhere quieter, easier, more manageable. So I sold it, moved into a small apartment with thin walls and no attic. And I tried not to think about the promises we make when grief is loud and generosity is cheap. That evening, I called Ellie. "I'd like to talk," I said. "Just the two of us." There was a pause. Then, "Of course. Tomorrow afternoon?" We met at a small coffee shop Hazel and I used to visit after school. Ellie looked tired, like someone who lived in a house where the lights stayed on too long and the silences were too deep. We spoke politely at first, about Hazel's reading level, about the weather, about sugar-free baking. Then I asked, "Did Thomas mention anything about the Christmas dinner theme?" She hesitated. "He wants to honor the family legacy." "Whose version?" I asked. Her shoulders dropped slightly. "I'm not sure anymore." I looked her in the eye. "Ellie, I don't need protection, but Hazel does, and so do you." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She only nodded once, very slowly. When I stood to leave, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I found this in one of his briefcases. I don't know what it means, but it didn't feel right." I took it. We didn't hug. But as I walked away, I heard her whisper behind me, "Thank you for still showing up, even now." I didn't respond. Some things don't need to be said out loud to be heard. Hazel never liked noisy places. Even as a toddler, she'd cover her ears when the blender started or the doorbell rang too long. Instead, she gravitated toward stillness, the rustle of paper, the scratch of a pencil, the quiet rhythm of thinking things through before saying a word. That's how I knew something was different when she called me again, this time through a voice message sent from her tablet. It came in the middle of the night. No ringtone, just a soft notification blinking on my screen at 2:13 a.m. "Grandma," her voice whispered, "I need your help with something. I'm calling it Project Snowflake. But you can't tell anyone yet. Not even Mom. Not until I say go." She paused, then quieter still. "There's something wrong, and it's been wrong for a long time." The message ended. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. I didn't know whether to call back, drive over, or do nothing at all. So I waited, like I had so many times before. Like I did when Jack was deployed, like I did when Thomas stopped calling. 2 days passed before Hazel came to visit under the pretense of returning my scarf, the one I'd forgotten in their car the week prior. She showed up alone, with Ellie waiting in the driveway. Her hair was in braids, her gloves mismatched. As I opened the door, Hazel held out the scarf with both hands, but tucked beneath it was her tablet, screen dimmed, fingerprints smudged along the edges. She walked straight in without a word. I followed. In the kitchen, she placed the tablet on the table, pressed the button, and turned the volume low. What I heard made my breath catch. Thomas's voice. "I don't care if the account is under her name. I have power of attorney. She won't even notice. Just move the funds before Christmas. We'll call it a reallocation." A different clip followed. This time, his tone was sharper. "If Ellie doesn't sign, I'll make her life a living hell. She doesn't get to pretend she's not involved in this. She married into it." Hazel looked up at me. "I recorded them. On different days. I hid the tablet in the piano room, under the bench. I set it to voice activate." My hands trembled. "Hazel, why?" Her expression didn't match her age. It belonged to someone older, wiser, tired. "Because he doesn't just yell at you, Grandma. He yells at Mom, at me, with his eyes, with his rules, with how we have to rehearse what we say when guests come." I sat down slowly, unsure if it was my knees or my mind giving out first. Hazel pulled out a small notebook, spiral-bound, stickers peeling at the edges. Inside were scribbles, timestamps, and a list of names. "What's this?" I asked. "Witnesses. Kind of. Mom's friend Cynthia saw one of the arguments. So did Ms. Chan from next door. And I think Ethan's dad heard something too. I'm still figuring it out." I stared at the page. "Sweetheart, this isn't just a game. This could—" "I know," she interrupted. "That's why I sent the files to Grandpa's friend, the one from the picture in your hallway, Mr. Alfred. You still have his letter, right?" I blinked. "How do you know about Alfred?" She shrugged. "You mentioned him once. I looked him up. He's still alive, lives in Roseburg. He used to send Grandpa letters with army stamps, so I found his address and mailed him a copy." A dozen questions rushed through my mind, none of them with simple answers. "You did all this on your own?" "I had help. Mr. Bailey, my teacher. He didn't know what it was for, but he helped me encrypt the files before I sent them. Said it was for a digital storytelling project." I exhaled slowly. My granddaughter had built a web of truth while I was still trying to decide which dress to wear to Christmas dinner. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. Hazel stood straighter. "Don't say anything. Just be ready." She opened her backpack and pulled out a battery pack, a charger, and a typed document with bold letters at the top. "Emergency Protocol, Project Snowflake." "Batteries at 100%, she said, zipping everything into a velvet pouch. "Backups complete, trigger armed." I looked at her then, not as a child, not as someone to shield, but as an ally, one who saw what others looked away from. "Does Ellie know?" I asked carefully. Hazel shook her head. "Not yet. She's scared. And when people are scared, they don't always tell the truth. But if I show her the right thing at the right time, she will." The velvet pouch glinted in the light like a secret gift no one was meant to find. "Hazel, what are you planning to do?" She didn't smile. She didn't blink. "Stop pretending he's not hurting people, even if they love him." I reached across the table and held her hand. It was small, but steady. "When?" I asked. "Christmas Eve," she said. "Right before dessert. When everyone's too full to move and too proud to leave, that's when people are most honest." I laughed softly. Jack used to say something similar. She tilted her head. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "Just, you remind me of someone." Hazel zipped up her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and stood. "Grandpa wouldn't yell like that," she said at the door. "So why does Dad?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Some questions don't need replies, just action. Christmas Eve arrived like it had every year. Snow reluctant to fall, sky the color of old cotton, and a stillness in the air that made everything feel fragile. But this year, nothing about it felt the same. I dressed carefully, not for beauty, not for attention, but for remembrance. I chose a navy blue coat Jack had given me long ago, with frayed seams hidden beneath its lining. I pinned his old cufflink to the lapel, not because anyone would notice, but because I would know it was there. A quiet gesture to myself. You belong here, even if they pretend you don't. When I stepped into Thomas and Ellie's house that evening, everything smelled like cinnamon and money. The dining room was laid out like a magazine spread. Crystal glasses, gold-rimmed china, a grand centerpiece that looked like it cost more than a month's rent. Soft jazz floated in the background, and someone had dimmed the lights just enough to make every guest look 10 years younger. Hazel found me first. She didn't speak, just touched my hand as she passed, her small fingers trailing against mine like a signal. She wore a dark green dress with a single silver hairpin. Her tablet, I noticed, wasn't in sight. Neither was the velvet pouch. I didn't ask. "Mother," Thomas said from across the room, walking toward me with a glass of wine already in hand. "You look nostalgic." I gave a faint smile. "You look rehearsed." He chuckled politely, the way he does at court, I imagine, just enough to appear gracious, just enough to conceal. "We've prepared a little something for the guests tonight," he continued. "A speech, a few legacy reflections, and some acknowledgments. Just go with it. We'll cue you when it's your turn." "My turn?" He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "We've seated you near the piano. Background, not spotlight. Just let the night flow. It's for Hazel's sake." The words settled into my chest like stones. Not even a pretense of kindness, just instructions. I nodded once, not in agreement, but in awareness. I knew what this was now, a performance, a curated gathering to shape memory before it could become truth. Ellie moved through the crowd like a shadow, smiling when she had to, nodding when someone asked about her dress. But she didn't meet my eyes until later, just before dinner was served. When she finally did, it was only for a second, and in that second, I saw fear, not of me, of him. The guests arrived steadily. Friends from Thomas's firm, former clients, a retired judge or two, neighbors in tailored coats. Everyone laughed just slightly too loud, held eye contact just slightly too long, as though they all knew they were part of something that wasn't entirely real. The place cards at the table had been printed in gold foil. I found mine, Quinn Harwood, tucked at the far end by the window near the coat rack. My chair wobbled slightly, uneven on one leg. I folded my napkin neatly across my lap and waited. Dinner began with a slideshow. Yes, a slideshow. Photos of Thomas growing up, set to a soundtrack of soft piano music. Him with his first soccer trophy, him at graduation, him with Ellie beaming beneath their wedding arch. Then a final slide, a stylized title card that read, "A Legacy of Strength, the Harwood Story." Guests applauded politely. Thomas stood. "Before we begin dessert, I'd like to say a few words. This evening is more than a celebration. It's a recognition of where we come from and who we've chosen to become." Hazel sat perfectly still beside Ellie. Her hands were folded, her expression unreadable. I felt, rather than heard, my phone vibrate gently in my coat pocket. One buzz. Pause. Another buzz. I didn't reach for it. Thomas continued, gesturing to the table like a conductor. "Our family isn't perfect, but it is principled, and tonight we honor the values that built this house." He turned slightly, looked directly at me. "Some of us were raised by people who did their best, and some of us chose to do better." A few guests chuckled, unsure if it was a joke. Thomas raised his glass. "To evolution." The room murmured, and people lifted their drinks. Hazel did not. She blinked once, then reached down beside her chair. I held my breath. But she didn't stand, not yet. Instead, Ellie spoke, for the first time that evening. "I think Hazel would like to say something later," she said, voice trembling slightly. "She's prepared a little surprise." Thomas's brow twitched, only slightly. "But I saw it." "Of course," he said slowly, "as long as it's appropriate." Hazel nodded. "I'll know when it's time," she said. It was the only thing she said all night. After the plates were cleared and someone started pouring coffee, I rose from my seat and made my way toward the window. I needed air, just a sliver, just enough to stay steady. Outside, snow had finally begun to fall. Light, tentative flakes drifting onto the stone path. From behind me, I heard the tablet power on, a faint glow reflected in the window's glass. Hazel's voice was soft but sure. "Backup completed, battery 100%, trigger armed." I turned toward her, but she wasn't looking at me. She was watching her father. And for the first time all evening, he looked unsure. The morning after the Christmas Eve dinner, I stood in my apartment kitchen, staring at the last tea bag in the box. I had brewed the same brand for over 30 years, Earl Grey, 1 sugar, no milk. Jack used to tease me about my loyalty to routine, but now those routines felt like the only things untouched by change. I carried the mug to the table, sat down, and opened the envelope Ellie had slipped into my coat pocket the night before. It was a legal document. More precisely, it was a real estate transfer form, blank, unsigned, but partially filled. At the top was the address of my old home. At the bottom, a line for my signature. I blinked at the words in the corner. Power of Attorney, enacted March 3rd, 2023. I never signed anything like that, not in March, not ever. The page trembled in my hands. Hazel had warned me. Doris had warned me. And now the pieces began falling into place faster than I could hold them. I went to the drawer where I kept my personal records, bank slips, insurance letters, utility bills. In the back, tucked inside a worn folder labeled Savings, I found a recent statement I hadn't fully read. I unfolded it now and scanned the lines. $180 to $475.63. Still there, still in my name. Then I noticed something new at the bottom. A pending transfer request to Harwood Holdings, LLC. Status: processing. Processing. Not completed yet. I picked up the phone and dialed the bank. My voice was calm, measured. The kind of voice I used to use when parents called the school yelling about test scores or cafeteria policies. "This is Quinn Harwood. I'd like to speak to a branch manager regarding an unauthorized transfer request from my account. Yes, I'll hold." I looked out the window while I waited. The snow had frozen overnight, leaving everything dusted in white ice. The streets were quiet. Salem always felt smaller the week after Christmas, as if the whole town exhaled after holding its breath for the holidays. A voice came on the line. "Mrs. Harwood, this is Mr. Patel, branch manager. We did receive a transfer request from someone listed as your power of attorney, but since the transfer is significant, we put a 48-hour hold pending verification." My heart pounded. And who authorized the hold? It's standard for large transactions flagged by our internal system. We require voice confirmation for accounts over a certain threshold. "Then you haven't spoken to me. Cancel it immediately." A pause. "I'll initiate the cancellation and place a fraud alert. But may I ask, have you previously submitted a power of attorney document to our office?" "No, never. Not one word." He exhaled audibly. "Then we have a problem, because we have one on file, submitted by your son, Thomas Harwood, earlier this year." I closed my eyes. "I want a copy. Certified. Delivered to me by end of day." "You'll have it." I hung up and sat in silence. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It wasn't even about the dinner. This was theft. A quiet kind. The kind that doesn't come with broken locks or shattered windows, but with pens and smiles and the assumption that you won't notice until it's too late. By noon, I was at Doris's house. She answered in her robe, hair still damp from the shower. "I was expecting you," she said, stepping aside. I handed her the document Ellie had given me and the bank statement. She read both slowly, glasses perched on the end of her nose. "I know this trick," she muttered. "They fill in just enough to make it seem casual, leave the signature line blank until the target's distracted or frightened." She pointed to the date. "This is backdated, and the notary stamp isn't from this county. Sloppy work." I smiled grimly. "Sloppy or arrogant?" Doris gave a short laugh. "Both." She disappeared into the back room and returned with her old embossing kit. "I've kept a lot of things," she said. "Some out of nostalgia, some because I knew one day someone would try to rewrite your name out of your own life." She pressed the seal into a fresh affidavit, signed her name beneath mine, and then added a second copy for redundancy. As she handed them to me, she added, "Jack trusted me for a reason. I keep records, and I never destroy originals." I looked at her. "Do you still have Jack's will?" She nodded. "Sealed. Untouched." "Then I need it. Today." She didn't ask why. Instead, she returned moments later with a heavy envelope, one I recognized immediately. Jack's handwriting, his seal, the weight of his words. I held it to my chest like a shield. At home, I placed the envelope inside Hazel's velvet pouch, along with the printed bank document, Doris's affidavit, and a list of questions I intended to ask Thomas, not with raised voices, not with rage, but with facts. Paper doesn't flinch. I texted Alfred. "Do you still have the letter Jack sent you after Thomas's graduation? I need it. Quinn." A minute later, a reply. "I do. Still sealed. Want me to drive up?" "Yes. Tomorrow. Early. Before anything happens." I glanced at the clock. Less than 24 hours before the next family dinner. The final dinner. And this time, I wouldn't sit by the window. The next morning, I heard the knock before I even saw the time. I opened the door to find Alfred Moss standing in the hallway holding a thermos of black coffee and an envelope weathered at the edges. He hadn't changed much. His frame was thinner, his walk a little slower, but his eyes were sharp. The kind of eyes that had seen the inside of too many war zones and too many funerals. Jack used to say Alfred never missed the truth, only the timing. "I got here early," he said, stepping in. "Didn't sleep much last night. Figured you didn't either." I shook my head, took the coffee, and gestured to the kitchen. He handed me the envelope and sat across from me. The seal was still unbroken. "Jack sent this to me a few weeks after Thomas passed the bar exam, told me not to open it unless something felt off." I nodded, fingers hesitating over the flap. I didn't open it yet. Instead, I placed it on the table next to Jack's will, the original one, retrieved from Doris's careful archives. It had been sealed in a thick manila envelope, labeled in Jack's handwriting, "Final version, do not alter, Quinn keeps the rest." Doris arrived half an hour later, cane tapping steadily against the tile. She brought with her a fireproof folder, notarized copies of the affidavit we'd made the day before, and something I hadn't asked for, an old Polaroid. In the photo, Jack stood next to Thomas in our backyard. Thomas was about 10, holding a wooden airplane they had built together. Jack's hand rested on his son's shoulder, firm but gentle. On the back, written in neat ink, were the words, "Strength doesn't scream." "I found it last night," Doris said quietly. "Thought Hazel might want it someday." We sat together in silence for a few minutes, the kind of silence people who've lost the same person can share without discomfort. Then Alfred leaned forward. "What exactly are you planning for tonight?" I exhaled. Not revenge, not spectacle. Just the truth, quietly placed where it can't be ignored. He nodded. Jack would approve. Hazel arrived just before noon, wearing her usual winter coat and carrying her backpack with the velvet pouch tucked carefully inside. Ellie waited in the car, eyes shaded behind large sunglasses, watching the house like someone waiting for a signal. Hazel entered and pulled the tablet from her bag. "It's all there," she said, placing it on the table. I labeled the clips and set up a folder with dates. Everything is backed up in 3 places. Even if he deletes this one, we have the others. I looked at Doris and Alfred. "We'll need witnesses. Not just tonight. After." Doris tapped her temple. "I have 2 former colleagues on standby. Both retired notaries. They're ready to sign statements if needed." Alfred added, "I called a friend in the reserves. He runs a security consultancy now. He reviewed the audio for authenticity. No edits. It'll hold up." Hazel unzipped a side pocket of her bag and pulled out something small and unexpected. A wooden token, round and smooth, with the Harwood family crest faintly burned into one side. "This was in Dad's drawer," she said. "He said it was from Grandpa, a symbol. But I think he kept it to remind himself of what he wanted to be, not what he became." I turned the token over in my hands. It was warm from her pocket, the wood worn from years of touch. "He doesn't deserve this," Hazel said, "but maybe someone else will." I handed it back to her. "Keep it. You're more Harwood than he's been in years." Ellie came inside a few minutes later, after Hazel texted her the all clear. She looked exhausted. Not in the way people do after sleepless nights, but in the way they do when they've spent too long pretending. She sat at the far end of the table, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the corner of the room. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for not saying something sooner." "You don't owe me an apology," I replied, "but Hazel does, and yourself." She nodded. "I'm ready now. I'll speak if needed." "You won't have to," Hazel replied. "The truth will." That afternoon we rehearsed, not speeches but moments. Who would carry what? Who would be seated where? What order the clips would play? Hazel had mapped it all in a spiral notebook with small tabs. "This isn't just about the money," she said at one point. "It's about who gets to decide what the story is." We all agreed. There would be no yelling, no dramatic gestures. Just the tablet, the folder, and a quiet unveiling of what Thomas had tried to bury beneath charm and control. Before they left, Alfred placed Jack's unopened letter in my hand again. "You should read it before tonight," he said, "but only when you're ready." After they drove off, I sat in the living room alone, envelope in my lap, the fire dying in the grate. I didn't open it yet. Instead, I looked at the clock. 6 hours until dinner. 6 hours until the story rewrote itself. The house smelled of roasted rosemary, vanilla, and expensive fabric softener. Every window glowed from within, and the driveway was lined with lanterns Thomas had arranged just so. Warm white, never too bright, no room for imperfection. I arrived precisely at 6 p.m., neither early nor late. The front door opened before I knocked. Thomas stood there with a wine glass in hand and a stage-ready smile stretched across his face. "Mother," he said smoothly, as if we hadn't spoken only once in the last 2 weeks. "Glad you could make it." I stepped inside, brushing past the scent of polished wood and control. The hallway was filled with murmurs and well-rehearsed laughter. I counted at least 40 guests in the main room, men in dark suits, women with winter pearls, children dressed like catalog models. Everything sparkled, except the air between us. Hazel found me first. Her dress was deep burgundy tonight, with a small silver pin on the collar. No tablet in sight, but her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She gave one nod and stepped aside, letting me move toward the table. My name card read Mrs. Harwood. No first name, no matriarchal title, just the vague echo of a role I used to own. I was seated beside a woman I didn't recognize, Thomas's newest paralegal, perhaps, or a client's wife. She wore fur cuffs and an expression that said she preferred cocktails over conversation. Thomas stood at the head of the table, carving the roast like a seasoned host. Ellie sat beside him, smiling in the mechanical way people do when they're afraid of shattering glass. As courses were served, stuffed mushrooms, a bisque I didn't taste, lamb with minted potatoes, I listened. Not to the food, but to the conversations around me. "Hazel's growing up so fast," one guest said, sipping wine. "A shame her grandmother's so rigid," another whispered. "I heard she's been forgetting things," someone added, voice hushed but sharp. "Might be time for an adjustment." No one looked at me as they said it. That was the trick. Say it loud enough to be heard, quiet enough to deny. Ellie caught my eye. Her hands were still, her fork untouched, and beneath the tablecloth I saw Hazel's hand slip into hers. Across the room, Deborah Lyman approached. Her silver hair was piled high, and she walked with the ease of someone who had been wealthy long enough to forget how to try. She leaned in, wine swirling gently. "Quinn," she said smoothly, "do you remember me?" I nodded. "History club, sophomore year." She laughed, surprised. "Well done. You haven't lost your memory yet." I met her gaze. "No, Deborah, but some people have lost their manners." A few heads turned. No one laughed. She shrugged and walked away, lips tight. Thomas called for attention. He stood tall, arms raised slightly, not too high, never too desperate. "Friends, colleagues, family, thank you all for joining us tonight. This is more than a dinner. It's a celebration of heritage, of legacy." He gestured toward the old family crest mounted above the fireplace, a symbol he hadn't acknowledged in 20 years. "We come from a line of builders, educators, protectors. Tonight we honor those who laid the foundation and those who will carry the torch." He looked at me, and sometimes that means recognizing when a torch has burned out. A few uneasy chuckles. Ellie closed her eyes. "Now," he continued, "before dessert, I'd like to open the floor for a few words, but let's keep things short. We don't want to exhaust our guests." He gestured to Deborah again. "Deborah has a lovely anecdote about family transitions. Something about legal clarity, I believe?" Deborah stepped forward with rehearsed elegance. "Well," she began, "I've always said it's better to prepare while people are still lucid. You never want to find out too late that someone can't legally sign anymore." My chair was cold against my back, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Hazel didn't blink. Ellie stared at her wine glass, her breath held in like it didn't belong to her. Thomas chuckled. "Spoken like a true planner. Of course, in our case, everything is in perfect order, but it never hurts to clarify, right?" He looked directly at me. "Mother, would you care to say something? Perhaps a memory? A brief one?" The room turned toward me. Smiles frozen. Cameras half raised. I rose, slowly. Not because I was frail, but because I wanted the silence to stretch just long enough to remind them what it meant. "I remember a boy," I began, "who used to build forts from couch cushions, who once cried when he saw a squirrel get hit by a car, who asked me at 7 years old if kindness could be inherited." The room held still. "That boy," I said, "was my son." I looked at Thomas. "I don't know where he went, but I hope one day he finds his way back." I sat down. No applause, no polite nods. Just the clinking of a spoon against a dish as someone stirred their untouched coffee. Then Hazel stood, quiet, composed. Her hands were empty, but I saw Ellie reach into her bag and hand her the velvet pouch. Hazel opened it and pulled out the tablet. Thomas's face changed, slightly. The shift of a man realizing the script has been taken from his hands. Hazel looked up, her voice clear. "I think," she said, "we should hear what happens when no one is watching." The screen lit up, and the room went still. The first sound on the tablet wasn't Thomas's voice. It was mine, or rather, my silence. Soft, breathless background noise as he paced the study 3 nights before Christmas, unaware of Hazel's tablet blinking quietly from under the piano bench. "You need to sign it," he snapped. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Then Ellie's voice, hushed but trembling. "I don't understand why it has to be now. It's Christmas." "Because timing matters," he interrupted. "Because perception matters. Because if she dies and her finances are still in her name, it creates unnecessary delays." A guest gasped. Someone's fork dropped. Hazel stood motionless, holding the screen up for the room to see. The audio continued. "You'll sign it," Thomas growled, "or I'll make sure you're the one who looks unstable." The video paused. Hazel didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Thomas took a step forward. "Hazel, put that down." His voice tried to sound measured, but the edges frayed. "No," she said. "Not tonight." He turned to Ellie. "Did you know about this?" Ellie didn't answer. From behind them, Deborah cleared her throat. "Maybe we should all take a moment." "No," I said, standing again. My voice was steady. "No more moments, no more pauses. Let's not wrap this up in bows and polite deflection." Thomas faced me, red creeping into his neck. "You let her do this?" "I didn't let her," I replied. "She saw what we all pretended not to, and she chose to act." He laughed, short, bitter. "You think playing a few edited clips changes anything? This is a family gathering, not a courtroom." Hazel pressed play again. This time the room heard the full sentence. "She's a financial burden. She has no idea her accounts are just placeholders. Once that transfers through, she'll be a footnote." Then a scraping noise. A chair pushed back. My voice, quiet. "I can hear you." His response? Silence. Then Ellie's. "Thomas, stop." And then the recording ended. The living room was silent again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was heavy, breathless. Some guests looked away. A few stood, pretending to check their phones. One of the judges slowly set down his drink without sipping it. Thomas turned to Ellie. "You were supposed to be on my side." She met his gaze. "I was, until I realized being on your side meant disappearing into it." He looked at Hazel. "You think this makes you strong? Turning on your father in front of strangers?" Hazel didn't flinch. "I think pretending not to know the truth is what makes people weak." He turned back to me. "So this is what it is now? You all stage an ambush at Christmas? You think you're teaching me a lesson?" "No," I said. "I think we're refusing to forget who you used to be." For a moment, Thomas stood in the center of the room, surrounded by people who had once respected him, admired him, relied on him for dinner parties and sound bites and legal advice. But none of them looked at him the same now. The illusion had cracked. "You think a few recordings and a scared little girl are enough to ruin me?" he said finally. Hazel spoke before anyone else could. "I'm not scared," she said. "Not anymore." She walked across the room, placed the tablet on the coffee table, and turned to the guests. "You all came here for a legacy speech," she said. "That's what he promised. So here it is. Legacies aren't built by taking things. They're built by what you protect." She looked back at her father. "Grandpa told me that in one of his old videos." Thomas stared at her, jaw tight, but he didn't say another word. Ellie walked toward Hazel and wrapped her arms around her daughter. Not for show, not to pose, just to be close to something still honest. Doris stepped forward next. "Before anyone leaves," she said clearly, "I'd like to make a few clarifications. As Jack Harwood's longtime legal notary and executor of his final testament, I can confirm that the original will is intact. And no, it was never rewritten by Thomas Harwood." She held up a sealed folder. "In fact," she added, "Jack's final wishes left a significant portion of his estate in a trust, entirely in Hazel's name, unreachable by anyone else until she turns 25, including her father." A soft murmur rippled across the room. Thomas's face drained of color. Ellie let out a breath she'd been holding for years. Someone from the back, a colleague of Thomas's perhaps, gathered their coat and left. Others followed quietly, shoes scuffing against the hardwood floors. The only sound left was the distant chime of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. Thomas turned toward me one last time. You think this is justice. No, I said gently. This is clarity. He stood there a moment longer, then walked to the fireplace, poured out his wine, and disappeared down the hallway. The front door remained open. Hazel sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her. She looked like a child again, but something in her posture told me she'd never fully be one again. I walked over and knelt beside her. Are you okay? She nodded. I didn't do it to hurt him. I know. I just didn't want him to erase you. I touched her cheek. He couldn't. Not really. But thank you for making sure no one else tried. From the dining room, Ellie reappeared, her shoulders a little straighter than before. Mom, she said softly, the lawyer's already received the files. Doris emailed him last night. The accounts are safe. I nodded. Then I looked around the room at the half-eaten food, the abandoned wine glasses, the echo of things that had tried to stay hidden. It was over, and it was just beginning. Hazel didn't rush. She waited until the last wine glass stopped trembling on the table, until the room had fully absorbed the weight of what had just been heard. Only then did she lift the tablet once more and press play. This time, the video wasn't secret audio. It was footage. Blurry at first, but steady. The image came into focus. Thomas standing in the kitchen, phone in one hand, documents in the other. The countertop behind him was scattered with manila folders and a laptop screen showing financial dashboards. Ellie's voice could be heard clearly. Why are there withdrawals from her account? She never authorized this. I told you, Thomas snapped. I have power of attorney. That signature was added weeks ago. Ellie moved into frame. She looked small, hunched. You forged it? He leaned closer, his tone lowering. Don't say that out loud, not unless you want to complicate things. Complicate things? Ellie's voice cracked. Thomas, this is your mother. You're draining her savings. He looked up from the papers. It's not about money, it's about control. If I don't hold the reins, she'll start asking questions. And questions invite lawyers. I don't want a legal war, I want silence. Hazel paused the video. Her eyes didn't move. She simply turned the screen toward Ellie. Ellie walked forward one step at a time as if wading through water. The silence in the room deepened. Every guest, whether seated or standing, held their breath. I never knew she recorded that, Ellie whispered. She recorded it because no one else would, I said softly. Ellie glanced at Thomas, who was now sitting at the edge of the dining room, elbows on knees, head bowed as if gravity had finally found him. She looked back at Hazel. You saved me. Hazel didn't smile. She just nodded once. I didn't want anyone to think we agreed, she said. I wanted proof. I wanted you to be able to say no if he ever made you say yes. Ellie's eyes shimmered. He did, for years. He said if I left, I'd never see Hazel again. He said the money was temporary, that your memory was fading, that it would all sort itself out. Did you believe him? I asked. I wanted to, because if I didn't, then I had to admit I was complicit. Hazel slipped the tablet back into her velvet pouch. She held it tightly in both hands, like a candle in a windstorm. Then she said, almost in a whisper, Grandpa said, silence lets rot grow. The words drifted into the room and settled, delicate and sharp. They didn't accuse, they confirmed. From the far side of the living room, Doris cleared her throat gently. I can provide written statements, she said, to verify the date of the original will and the time-stamped documents Jack left behind. One of the guests, a woman I barely knew, stepped forward and added, I work with Adult Protective Services. I've seen this before. I didn't think I'd see it here. And then another voice. Deborah. She looked pale now, her glass abandoned on the side table. I owe you an apology, she said quietly, carefully. I thought you were slipping. Thomas said you'd been inconsistent. I believed him. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Hazel walked across the room and handed me the tablet. Now they know, she said. All of them. I looked down at the black screen. It still held the truth. But now, the weight of it didn't sit on her small shoulders alone. From the hallway, Alfred appeared. He had waited outside until the signal came. Doris had texted him a single word: now. He walked with that same quiet steadiness Jack had always admired. "Evening," he said to the room. "My name's Alfred Moss. I served with Jack Harwood. I've known this family since Thomas was knee-high to a coffee table." He held up an envelope, Jack's final letter. "This was sent to me nearly a decade ago. Jack asked me to deliver it only if Quinn or Hazel were ever made to feel invisible." He looked straight at Thomas. "Seems like that time came." Thomas didn't respond. His hands were folded in his lap, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked like someone who'd fallen through the ice and was still pretending it was dry ground. Alfred handed the letter to me. I didn't open it yet. Not here, not tonight. Hazel climbed into the armchair beside me and leaned her head against my shoulder. Ellie joined us on the couch. She didn't speak, just sat close, letting the warmth between us become its own kind of apology. The guests began to leave, not all at once, but steadily. Some shook my hand. Some simply nodded. A few looked ashamed. None looked at Thomas. The house emptied in waves. When the last guest left and only our small circle remained, I finally stood. "I think I'll go now," I said quietly. Thomas lifted his head. "Mother," I paused. "Don't. Not now. Not until you understand the difference between inheritance and legacy." Then I turned to Hazel. "Are you ready to go?" She took my hand. Always. As we walked toward the door, Ellie followed, one step behind. I glanced over my shoulder. "Are you coming?" Ellie hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," she said, "I'm done playing along." Outside, the snow had thickened. It crunched beneath our boots, soft and forgiving. Hazel slipped her hand into mine. "I didn't want to hurt him," she said. "I know," I whispered. "That's why you saved him more than any of us could." She looked up at me. "Do you think Grandpa's proud?" I squeezed her fingers. "I know he is." The door closed behind us with a sound softer than I expected. No slamming, no parting words, just the hush of winter pressing in as the last sliver of heat from the house faded behind us. The three of us stood in the driveway, Hazel, Ellie, and me, beneath the haloed porch light. Snowflakes drifted down, slow and silent, gathering on Hazel's coat like tiny secrets. None of us spoke right away. Inside the house, Thomas didn't follow. He didn't call out, didn't run after Hazel. That, somehow, was the most telling part. A man who had orchestrated every conversation, every photo, every guest list, now letting us go without even attempting to stop it. Ellie turned slightly toward me. Her eyes were tired, but no longer afraid. "He won't let it end like this," she said quietly. "He already has," I replied, "but he'll try to spin it." "He can try." She pulled her coat tighter, her breath curling in the cold. I should have seen it sooner. I kept telling myself he was just under pressure, that he was doing what needed to be done for Hazel's future. "You don't have to explain," I said. "You lived it." Hazel looked up at us, then toward the dark windows behind the frost-lined curtains. "He's not going to say sorry, is he?" "No," I said softly. "Not tonight. Maybe not ever." She nodded. There wasn't bitterness in her expression, just something quieter, something like mourning. As we stepped toward the car, headlights swung into the driveway. It was Doris. She rolled down the window and called out, "I thought I might find you still here." We approached. Hazel smiled as Doris reached across the passenger seat and opened the door. "I thought you could use a ride home," she said to me, "and I brought a few things, just in case Thomas decides to play damage control." From the back seat, she handed me a folder labeled Interim Guardianship and Asset Freeze Request. "I filed it first thing this morning. If he tries to transfer anything else, the court will know by Monday." I blinked. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," she interrupted, "because I remember what it felt like to be a woman everyone dismissed until the paperwork spoke louder than their voices." Ellie looked at me. "Go with her. I'll take Hazel." Are you sure? She nodded. We need some space, just the two of us. Hazel leaned over and hugged me. A full, solid hug, no rush, no fear of being watched. I'll see you tomorrow, she said into my coat. I'll make pancakes, I whispered back. She smiled. With the burnt edges? The only way. As Ellie and Hazel pulled away, Doris waited for me to settle into the passenger seat. Once we were alone, she asked, How do you feel? I exhaled, like I left something behind, but I'm not sure it was mine to carry anymore. We drove in silence for a while. Streetlights cast long shadows across the snowbanks. Houses glowed with wreaths and garlands, unaware of what had just unraveled a few blocks away. At a red light, Doris said, I was proud of you tonight. I wasn't brave, I murmured. Hazel was. Maybe, but sometimes the bravest thing is choosing not to match the volume of someone else's cruelty. We reached my apartment. Before I stepped out, Doris handed me a manila envelope from her glove box. What's this? Jack's last set of notes. Not legal, just personal. He left them with me years ago, said they were for you if things ever got too quiet in the wrong way. I held the envelope to my chest. Thank you. You don't have to read it tonight, she said. But it's there. Like he said, it's always better to have the truth ready, even if you don't need it yet. She waited until I was safely inside before driving away. That night, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't call anyone. I simply made tea, placed the envelope on the table, and sat beside it in silence. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, for the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. The next morning arrived quietly, as if the snow had muffled time itself. No phone calls, no emails, no knock on the door. Just the hum of the radiator, the light groan of the window as it adjusted to the cold, and the stillness that came after something long awaited had finally cracked open. I stayed in my robe longer than usual. I made tea with extra lemon, and when I sat down at the kitchen table, I brought the envelope Doris had given me the night before. It was worn at the corners, sealed with old tape, and labeled in Jack's handwriting, for Quinn, when silence needs company. I didn't open it right away. I ran my finger across the ink. I remembered how Jack wrote, slowly, like he was thinking through each letter. Never rushed, never sloppy. His writing, like his presence, always arrived at the exact weight you needed. The doorbell rang at 9:17 a.m. I opened the door to find Hazel standing on the porch, bundled in her thickest coat, holding a thermos taller than her forearm. Hot cocoa, she said, lifting it, and marshmallows, real ones, not the dry kind. I stepped aside without a word. She shrugged off her coat, boots squeaking on the mat. Her eyes landed on the envelope before I said anything. Is that from him? I nodded. Can I stay while you read it? I looked at her. This 9-year-old girl with the eyes of a woman who'd already learned how to spot the cracks in a smile, and I nodded again. She sat across from me, poured cocoa into 2 mugs, and didn't speak as I peeled back the seal. Inside was a folded letter. No date. Just my name at the top, written in Jack's slow, heavy hand. Quinn, I've always known you'd be the last one standing. You were built for quiet battles, those slow, aching wars that don't get medals, the ones where people forget you were ever in them until they realize someone's still holding the roof up. If you're reading this, then I was right, and if I was right about that, then I trust you've done what needed doing. Thomas was born into your softness and my steel. I wanted him to grow into the space between us. But sometimes, people inherit more than love. Sometimes they inherit the fears we never meant to pass on. I failed him in ways you'll never say out loud, and that's why I need you to hear this. You didn't make him cold. You just couldn't melt what I froze. If he turns on you, if he turns on Hazel, don't fight to win. Fight to remind him of the warmth he buried. And if he won't come back, walk away knowing that you left the light on anyway. You were never invisible, Quinn. You were the lighthouse. Always, Jack. I folded the letter with trembling hands, not from grief, from recognition, from the weight of someone finally saying what I'd never dared to name. Hazel reached for my hand. "He knew," she said quietly. "Yes." "And he didn't blame you?" I shook my head. "No, he blamed himself." Hazel sipped her cocoa. "I think Dad always thought Grandpa was disappointed in him." I looked at her. He wasn't. He just didn't know how to say what he felt. She tilted her head. "Then maybe that's what this is for, saying what people couldn't say back then." I reached for the drawer beside the fridge. From it, I pulled out a small photo album. Nothing fancy, just plastic sleeves and handwritten labels. Hazel slid her chair closer as I flipped through it. There was Jack in his army uniform, Jack teaching Thomas to ride a bike, Thomas at 8, holding a fish nearly as big as his torso, grinning while Jack stood behind him, arms crossed in pride. Then Hazel pointed to a photo I hadn't seen in years, Thomas and Jack at the old upright piano, Jack's hand guiding Thomas's fingers on the keys, both of them laughing. "Was that real?" she asked. "Did Dad really like music?" I smiled. He loved it. He used to play for hours when he thought no one was listening. He didn't like sheet music. He played by feel. Then why did he stop? I paused. Because somewhere along the way he decided that control was safer than joy. Hazel nodded slowly. He forgot the sound of his own song. We sat like that for a while. 2 generations, 1 pot of cocoa, and the weight of a man who had tried to teach us strength in silence, but also left us permission to break it when needed. Hazel reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the wooden token again, the one with the Harwood crest. "He left this for me," she said. "Dad didn't want me to have it, but I do. Not to remember what he did, but to remember what he could have been." I touched her hand. "He still can be. Maybe not for you, not now, but people do change." Hazel looked skeptical, but she nodded. "I don't need him to change for me. I just needed him to stop pretending he already had." The radiator hissed. The clock ticked. The sun outside melted last night's frost from the window glass. Hazel flipped back to the piano photo. "He could have been kind," she whispered. "That's the saddest part." I wrapped my arm around her shoulder and pulled her in gently. "Yes," I said, "but you are, and that's what breaks the pattern." 2 days after Christmas, I stepped into the courthouse without makeup, without jewelry, and without apology. I wore a dark blue coat with deep pockets, one holding Jack's letter, the other Hazel's list of 10 things Grandpa loved. Ellie walked beside me. Her steps were slow but steady, like someone relearning how to move through the world without ducking. Hazel had stayed home with Doris, curled up under 2 blankets with her favorite notebook and an orange cat borrowed from the neighbor upstairs. She didn't need to be here for this part. She had already done more than enough. The courtroom wasn't crowded, just a handful of reporters, 2 clerks, a bailiff, and a few scattered attorneys in stiff suits. But at the front, waiting quietly at the defendant's table, sat Thomas. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Ellie either. His tie was crooked. His hands fidgeted under the table. This wasn't a criminal case. Not yet. This was civil court, a motion for injunctive relief and emergency conservatorship review. Legal terms, dry terms. But beneath the paperwork was something far less sterile. Betrayal, dressed in protocol. My attorney, Mr. Yates, nodded as I entered. A man in his 70s with white eyebrows and a soft voice. He had been a friend of Jack's once. Long ago. He'd spent the last 2 days reviewing documents, audio files, bank statements. That letter Jack had tucked into Alfred's hands 10 years too early and exactly on time. Judge Ramirez entered the courtroom. She wore no expression, just a calm that made you want to sit straighter. The proceedings began. Mr. Yates spoke first, calm, unshaken. "We are not here to ruin a reputation, Your Honor. We are here to protect what was nearly erased. This is a request to freeze further financial activity on Mrs. Harwood's estate, to nullify a forged power of attorney, and to ensure her original legal documents, her husband's will included, are upheld in full." Judge Ramirez nodded slowly. And do you have proof that said power of attorney was falsified? We do. Signed statements from 2 notaries, digital metadata confirming the document was altered after scanning, and audio recordings in which Mr. Thomas Harwood admits his intent to control his mother's finances without her consent. Ramirez turned to Thomas's attorney, a man too young for the case he'd been handed. Do you contest the authenticity of these files? The lawyer cleared his throat. We have not yet reviewed all of the materials presented. We would request time to— You've had 48 hours, Ramirez interrupted. That's more than enough time for discovery in an emergency hearing. Continue. Ellie took the stand next. She didn't tremble. She didn't raise her voice. She just told the truth. He told me she wouldn't notice. That if I helped him, Hazel would have everything she ever wanted, and if I didn't, he made it clear I'd regret it. There was no dramatic music, no banging gavel, just the quiet sound of someone finally breaking the pattern. After Ellie stepped down, I took the stand. I wasn't there to punish Thomas. I was there to stop him from continuing. I don't hate my son, I said. I grieve him. I grieve the boy who used to sit on our porch and ask why people lie. I don't know what scared him into thinking power was the only safe thing left in the world, but I refuse to let that fear rewrite what's true. Judge Ramirez asked one question. Do you feel unsafe, Mrs. Harwood? I paused. No, I said, but I feel unseen, and that, Your Honor, is how these things start. She nodded. Then she looked toward Thomas. You have the right to respond. He stood, slowly. I was trying to protect the family, he said. I didn't want things to get messy. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. So you falsified a signature, moved funds without authorization, and manipulated legal documents to avoid— mess? He didn't answer. She turned back to us. I am granting the motion for asset protection. All accounts under Mrs. Harwood's name will be frozen until this court reviews the original. Will in full. Furthermore, Mr. Harwood is hereby removed from all legal authority over his mother's estate, effective immediately. A pause. And if I may speak plainly, this court is not in the business of cleaning up quiet abuse with polite language. The gavel came down. Ellie let out a sound, half relief, half breath. I didn't realize I'd been gripping the edge of the witness box until my fingers ached. Outside the courthouse, Alfred waited beside his truck, hands in his pockets, scarf looped tight around his neck. Well, he asked. It's done, I said. Not quite, he replied, handing me a folder. I found something last night. Inside was a copy of a loan agreement. It was dated 3 years ago, signed by Thomas, co-signed by me. Only I had never seen it. $40,000, taken in my name, paid in pieces, but still open. He borrowed it against your old property, Alfred said, then moved the lien to a shell account. Paper trails all here. I stared at the numbers, at my forged signature. My chest tightened, not from shock, but from the confirmation of what I'd already suspected. He hadn't just tried to erase my future. He had rewritten my past. Do we go back inside? I asked. Not today, Alfred said. Let this stand for now. If he tries anything else, you'll already be 5 steps ahead. I looked at the courthouse steps behind me. I thought I'd feel angry, I said. And do you? No, just still. He nodded. Stillness is underrated. We stood there together a while longer, the cold biting gently at our cheeks, the sky above an endless soft gray. Somewhere down the block, I saw Ellie walking to her car, Hazel beside her, holding her hand. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to follow. The day I returned to the old house, it was quieter than I remembered. Not silent, just older. Like a song you haven't heard in years that still knows exactly when to pause. The key Ellie gave me the day after the hearing slid into the lock without hesitation. The door opened like it had been waiting, not surprised. Dust clung to the baseboards and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and aged wood, the kind of scent that holds more memory than any photo ever could. I didn't come back to live here, not permanently. I came to retrieve what was mine and to release what wasn't. Room by room, I moved slowly. In the hallway, I passed the coat rack Jack had built out of scrap walnut. Hazel's pink scarf still hung from one of the hooks, twisted like she dropped it there in a rush. In the living room, I paused at the piano. The bench was pushed in perfectly, as if no one had sat there in years. I opened the lid and touched one key. It rang out. Faint, a little flat, but familiar. I didn't cry, but my throat tightened the way it does when something dear brushes too close to the surface. The dining room held the most ghosts. Not angry ones, just shadows of birthdays, of school projects spread out over the table, of Jack resting his coffee mug on a coaster with the words, "Best Dad Ever," a Father's Day gift Thomas made at age 7. Upstairs, I entered the bedroom that had once belonged to me and Jack. The bed frame was still there, though the linens had changed. In the back of the closet, I found my old jewelry box, the one with the missing clasp and the tiny ballet shoes Hazel had dropped inside when she was 4. I opened a drawer and found a small photo album, not the main one. This one was personal, quiet, a single photo per page. Jack holding a newborn Thomas, Jack asleep on the floor with Hazel curled beside him, me standing in the garden, looking away from the camera. I didn't take much with me, just the photo album, the jewelry box, a sweater Jack had worn so often it still smelled like cedar, and the small kitchen timer shaped like a pear that always rang too early. In the backyard, the swing set leaned more than before. I didn't try to fix it. I just sat on the porch for a while, listening to the creak of the wind moving through bare trees. Before I left, I placed the old family portrait back on the hallway table. Jack, me, Thomas at 12, holding a puppy he begged us to adopt. I didn't take it with me. Some things need to stay where they were first framed. That night, back in my apartment, Hazel knocked on the door just after dinner. She held a small envelope and a cardboard invitation decorated in glitter. "Open it," she said. Inside was a card that read, "Women Who Changed My Life. Special Guests, 3rd grade essay presentation. Friday, 9 a.m., room 12B. I looked up. "You picked me?" Hazel nodded. "You taught me what to do when something's wrong, even if everyone else is pretending it's not." I pulled her into a hug and held her longer than usual. "You changed mine too, sweetheart." She pulled back, smiled, and added, "Oh, and you're supposed to wear something pink. That's the class theme." I laughed. "I'll see what I can do." We sat together for a while that evening, Hazel drawing pictures on the back of old receipts, me flipping through her spelling list. We didn't talk about Thomas. We didn't need to. The house was gone. But my home was never in those walls. It had always been in the people who remembered who I was before someone else tried to rewrite the story. It wasn't snowing on New Year's Eve, but the cold settled in like it knew it was the final note of a long, dissonant song. I arrived at Doris's cottage just after dusk, holding a pie I'd baked from scratch, burnt edges and all, the way Hazel liked it. She answered the door before I could knock. "You're early," she said, smiling. "Hazel told me if I was late, she'd eat my slice first." Doris laughed and stepped aside. The house smelled like mulled cider, cedar garland, and something warm from the oven. Inside, it was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that stings, but the kind that soothes. The kind that says, "You're safe here. Sit a while." Hazel sat cross-legged on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders, flipping through a book she didn't seem to be reading. Ellie sat beside her, knitting a scarf the color of early spring. Deborah Lyman, surprisingly, was there too, holding a mug of tea and looking softer than I'd ever seen her. I looked at her and raised an eyebrow. "I heard the truth," she said simply, "and when you know better, you do better." I nodded. That was enough. We shared dinner around a small table set with mismatched plates and more candles than necessary. Hazel insisted on leading the toast. To people who don't yell, she said, and to the ones who know when to. Everyone smiled. After dessert, we exchanged small gifts. Hazel gave me a pink wool pin in the shape of a lighthouse. I made it at school, she said, because that's what you are. Deborah reached into her bag and handed me a folded card. Inside was a note, written in elegant handwriting. If you ever need someone to remind you you're not invisible. I'm just across the fence. Harold, I looked up. My husband, Deborah said. He remembered you from years ago. He always thought you were the only one at those charity galas who actually listened. I tucked the note into my pocket. Some bridges aren't built. They're quietly rebuilt, one board at a time. The night ended without fireworks. No countdown, no loud cheers, just soft music, warm mugs, and a child curled up between two women who had both learned how to stay when it would have been easier to leave. As I helped clean up the kitchen, Ellie touched my arm. Thank you, she said, for not giving up on me. I looked at her, really looked. Thank you, I said, for not letting him win. We didn't say more. We didn't need to. Before I left, Hazel ran to the door and hugged me tightly, pressing her cheek against my coat. See you Friday? She asked. Wouldn't miss it for the world. She grinned. Pink sweater? Already in the closet. She gave me a thumbs up and turned back inside. I stepped out into the cold and looked up at the sky. No stars, just the quiet curve of clouds moving slowly, like breath. Not everything had been fixed, but everything had changed. The school auditorium smelled like crayons, pencil shavings, and too many chairs pushed too close together. Streamers hung from the ceiling in shades of pink and red, and a hand-painted banner read, Women Who Changed My Life, 3rd grade essay celebration. I sat in the second row, surrounded by mothers, grandmothers, teachers, and the occasional shy father adjusting his tie. Hazel had saved me a seat with a folded napkin and a drawing taped to the backrest, me with a lighthouse behind me and a tiny figure below, holding a tablet like a torch. I wore my pink sweater, the one with a small patch on the elbow I hadn't bothered to sew. Jack used to say perfection was overrated. Leave a stitch for the story, he told me once. So I did. One by one, children climbed the steps to the microphone, reading lines scribbled in big, hopeful letters. Some stammered, some shouted. One boy froze completely and was comforted by 3 classmates before he tried again. When Hazel's name was called, I held my breath. She walked up, quiet but steady, clutching her note cards with both hands. She didn't look at me right away. She looked at the crowd. Then she spoke. My essay is about my grandma, Quinn Harwood. She changed my life not because she was loud or famous or strong in the way superheroes are. She changed it because she didn't leave. The room quieted. She didn't leave when people forgot her name. She didn't leave when someone tried to erase her. She didn't leave when it got lonely. Hazel glanced at me now, her voice steady. She just kept showing up, even when it hurt. Even when it would have been easier not to. She held up one of the note cards. My grandma taught me that not all leaders shout. Some lead by standing still when it matters. Some lead by listening. She paused, then added softer. My grandma didn't yell. She taught me when silence must be broken. The auditorium held that stillness only a child's truth can create, the kind that lands not in the ears, but directly in the chest. Hazel stepped down and returned to her seat without fanfare, slipping her hand into mine like it had always belonged there. After the program, a dozen people stopped to shake my hand, thank me, tell me their own stories of forgotten grandmothers and fierce little girls. I listened. I smiled. I held their hands in both of mine. Later, as Hazel packed up her glittered backpack and her pink paper folder, I stood near the back of the room, watching the sunlight stretch across the floor. Ellie walked over, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She meant every word, she said. Didn't rehearse it with me, not once. I know. She's brave. So are you. Ellie nodded. He hasn't called. Let him sit in the silence. She exhaled. It's louder than he expected, I think. Hazel ran over, her boots thumping against the polished floor. I want pancakes, she announced, with the burnt edges. I smiled. You drive a hard bargain. She slipped her arm through mine. You're the lighthouse, she said. Remember? I kissed the top of her head. Always. We walked out into the sunlight. No snow this time, just crisp air and the echo of laughter behind us. The wind tugged at Hazel's braid, and I tucked it behind her ear. And as we crossed the street, hand in hand, I thought of all the things that had been said, and all the things that never needed to be. Sometimes, justice isn't a gavel or a courtroom. Sometimes, it's a whisper louder than rage.